Hello everyone and welcome to Archaeoviking. Today's video is the second video in a series I like to call Early Colonial Failures that disprove the myth of inherent superiority of European nations. And the specific video subject for today's video is that of the Anglo-Mughal War, which in itself is a tale of a particularly severe early failure by the British East India Company in their attempts to open trade as well as dominate the economies and political sphere of India. So, thanks to thanks to movies like The Pirates of the Caribbean and shows like Taboo, Tom Hardy's Taboo, not the National Geographic Taboo, Tom Hardy's Taboo on FX. In our modern mind, we now have a view of the British East India Company uh, as this sort of nebulous, powerful, militarized corporation that was trying to expand into the greater world and take control in order to make themselves more money. And this is characterized by individuals such as the main villain for the second and third Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Cutler Beckett, seen here in this image, um, who are out to find powerful weapons and other things to gain them more power and to essentially get world dominance for the British East India Company. And then when it comes to India, we some of the things that we sort of have pop up in our modern minds are things like the Taj Mahal. However, it's also important to note that neither of these really paints a very good picture of Indian history as a whole. For example, the Taj Mahal only paints a picture of the reign of Shah Jahan, one emperor of the Mughal Empire, which we'll cover in a minute, and not the entire history of the Mughal Empire and things like that. Just like the show, the Tom Hardy's Taboo on FX and the Pirates of the Caribbean movies don't really paint a good picture of the British East India Company. In fact, they sort of paint them as Bond villains or cartoon supervillains than anything. So, with that in mind, we now have to ask, well, what is the British East India Company and how and why did it start? Well, the British East India Company was essentially, the idea that it was a corporation and a militarized corporation is not far off from the truth. It's not completely true, but it's not that far off. It was essentially a corporation founded by various powerful British aristocrats. I don't want to say nobles, but aristocrats, such as the individual you see on the left, James Lancaster. And these individuals, including James Lancaster, created this sort of proto corporation in order to take advantage of the lucrative trade in what was known as the Dutch East Indies at the time, as well as in China, India, and other places like Arabia and Japan. And this was really a market that was already being dominated by earlier companies, such as the Dutch East India Company that you see here, but also the Portuguese as well as the Spanish. And so this was really an attempt for the British to sort of get in uh, on all the money and sort of get in to the market and make money for themselves as well and get all the goodies. Things like porcelain, tea, sugar, and silk, as well as precious metals from China, or spices from the Dutch East Indies, uh, silk, sorry, indigo and pepper and things like that from India, etc., etc. Um, and so this was really just a gold mine that that the British East India Company wanted to. I don't want to say tap because obviously it was already tapped by the Dutch East India Company, but they wanted to um, put it this way. So an oil rig company has already drilled a hole for oil. Another company wants to come in and drill a different hole to also get oil. That's essentially what this was. And eventually, the primary target, but not the only target, but the one of the primary targets alongside China by the British East India Company was the Mughal Empire of India, arguably the second most powerful empire in Asia at the time, after the Qing Empire in China, that had been founded by Mongol offshoots of the Mongol Timurid Empire, itself an offshoot of the original Mongol Empire, with led by the Mongol Han and possible descendant of Timur Ilang and Chinggis Khan, though of course that's always up for debate. Babur, who in the 1520s, um, began to march into India and began the conquests, creating the Mughal Empire that would eventually grow and encompass all but the southernmost tip of India and Sri Lanka, becoming a very powerful and very wealthy empire. And eventually, the British East India Company would actually open up negotiations with the Mughal Empire, specifically the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, who granted the British East India Company rights to set up trading posts and quote unquote factories, which were really just, not really factories like we think of, like, say, for a factory where a Hyundai or a Ford is produced. These were factories that were used for trade in cities such as Surat, Madras, Calcutta, and most importantly for this video, Bombay. And for many decades, this would be very lucrative trade for the British East India Company. They would make a lot of money and gain a certain degree of influence in these trade ports. However, this would all eventually come to a head during the reign of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. During Aurangzeb's reign, the British emissary William Hedges was sent to negotiate with Shaista Khan, or Khan, however you want to pronounce it. Han is for correct pronunciation. The governor of Bengal, and for a while it was going okay. It seemed like it was making headway. However, eventually the British East India Company official Josiah Child would try to interfere to get even more lucrative uh, trade deals, angering Aurangzeb, who then promptly stopped all negotiations uh, completely. And so, in response to this, Josiah Childs assembled a fleet with plans of laying siege to various cities in the province of Bengal. And it was somewhat successful, a little bit. It did startle Shaista Khan, and he did begin to open up more negotiations. However, this was actually a attempt to stall the British East India Company until the Mughal Empire could assemble its army. And in this process, the British East India Company would retreat. I don't want to say retreat. They would withdraw temporarily to various islands in the Hooghly River. I apologize to anybody from India for any mispronunciation that I may have done with that, but to the Hooghly River, which was essentially surrounded by a whole bunch of swamp and various other things. So disease such as malaria, as well as dehydration and various other things, began to greatly affect the British members of the Dutch East India Company military that was there. In response to this, as well as thanks to the stalling that Shaista Khan did, and the disease and various other things that began running rampant in the British East India Company, Aurangzeb ordered the seizing of various British East India Company assets all along the Arabian Sea, as well as up to the border of Iran and down here. Furthermore, Aurangzeb ordered one of his best generals, Yakut Khan, also known as Sidi Yakut, to gather a force of Indian soldiers as well as Muslim Indians called Mapilas from South India and the Ethiopian Empire, and in order him to lay siege to Bombay. Uh, and this was a very intense siege, and it went over the course of about a year, with actually with the British sort of stuck the whole time. The British East India Company, the British soldiers of the British East India Company proved to be very ineffective in the tropical heat of the Mughal Empire. And in fact, as the journals of the various British East India Company officials state during, who participated in the siege, state it was actually not the British who were able to help Bombay hold out for as long as it did, which was a year. It was the Indian soldiers who worked for the British East India Company because, of course, they were used to this environment. However, despite the effectiveness of the uh, Indian soldiers under the employ of the British East India Company, overall the victory went to Yakut Han, city Yakut, um, because disease and various other things began to take their toll on the British East Indian inhabitants of Bombay, as well as the fact casualties from continuous sorties, as they're called, basically assaults on Bombay by Yakut Khan's military forces began to cause a lot of casualties and wear down the population as well, eventually leading to the British East India Company to sue for peace. And eventually Aurangzeb would demand, I believe it was like 1 million, roughly 1 million rupees, give or take, as as well as demanded the British members of the British East India Company who were not in Bombay being laid siege to prostrate themselves, and ordering them to not essentially not make this mistake again, not to test the Mughal Empire anymore, uh, under threat of severe consequences. Eventually, uh, with these negotiations, would lead to Aurangzeb ordering City Yakut Khan to lift the siege of Bombay completely, which temporarily led to the British East India Company to have a resurgence of trading activity in Bombay, as well as setting up new factories in areas like Calcutta. However, the British East India Company would not listen to Aurangzeb and would, several years later, test their luck again, angering Aurangzeb again, leading Aurangzeb to send another one of his best generals, Dadu Khan Pani, to lay siege to Bombay again, to specifically Fort St. George, ending in yet another victory for the Mughal Empire, and even more concessions and reparations given by the British East India Company to the Mughal Empire, meaning that the British East India Company lost not once but twice to the Mughal Empire. I guess they wanted to stick their hand into the lion's mouth one more time. However, this would not last. And that's because after the death of Aurangzeb, who himself was a very expansionist emperor, bringing the Mughal Empire to its greatest influence, which again was all but this most southern part of India, as well as the fact that he was an incredibly authoritarian emperor. Um, he prosecuted the various other religions in the Mughal Empire, such as the Hindus and the Sikhs, and various other religious groups and cultural groups, making him a not popular emperor at all. And when he died, his son Bahadur Shah the First tried to reverse and that's the individual here on the left, tried to reverse his father's policies, as well as tried to reform the Mughal government overall. However, he would die fairly early on in his reign, ending any kind of reformation that would have helped keep the Mughal Empire stable. And so, after his death, various succession disputes happened, and so a slew of emperors who only ruled for 2 or 3 years, maybe 10 years at most, began to happen until by 1751, the Mughal Empire had lost most of its territory with the exception of Bengal and the area controlled here and here. As you can see, the orange is the remnants of the Mughal Empire, as well as down here. Meanwhile, the majority of India began to be taken up by various other successor kingdoms, such as the Maratha Confederacy and this domain labeled Nizam's domain, and various other things, as well as the Afghans, the Nepalis, etc. Sort of sparking the unofficial end of the Mughal Empire, as the Mughal Empire would still keep on kicking in a much weaker state well into the early to mid 1800s. But despite that, it was still no longer the empire that defeated the British East India Company twice. And eventually, this disunion in the Mughal Empire would allow the British East India Company to become the nebulous militarized corporation that we see in the Pirates of the Caribbean and things like that, because it did eventually become that, though their goal wasn't world domination, it was making money. But it only happened after getting their teeth kicked in a couple of times by the Mughal Empire. As you can see here, this is the British gains as they begin to slowly happen after the death of Bahadur Shah. So there you have it. Yes, Britain eventually did become at least the both the nominal and official rulers of India eventually. But in between the founding of the British East India Company and the eventual dominance of Britain and the British East India Company, which would also eventually be disbanded in the 1850s, but that's a whole nother video. We have two examples of the British East India Company making serious errors in judgment of whether or not they should have pissed off the ruler of this, one of the most powerful empires in Asia, which they did twice. Again, they pissed them off twice, and both times lost horribly. Both times, as I said, were essentially they were laid siege to and had a whole bunch of casualties and a whole bunch of disease, and we're like, we give up. So it doesn't really sound like a inherently superior nation, does it? Doesn't really sound like the British were inherently superior at all. And that's the whole point. And that concludes the video. So I hope you liked it. And if you want to see me cover any other subjects or have any comments about this video, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe, and have a good day.